Well, everyone supports a day of honour to mark Canada's Afghan engagement and the Canadians who died there, but some wonder if enough is being done beyond the symbolism for those who survived the decade of combat but returned mentally or physically wounded, and some have been critical of the rushed nature of the event. Let's bring in members of Parliament on this now. From the foyer of the House of Commons, we are joined by Conservative MP and Air Force veteran Erin O'Toole. Jack Harris is the defence critic for the NDP, and Frank Valeriat is the Veterans Affairs critic for the Liberal Party. Gentlemen, good to see you all. Thanks for being with me on this.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Toole, let me start with you. Why did the Prime Minister feel there needed to be a special day to honour the men and women who served and those who died in Afghanistan?
Well, certainly the commitment of the Canadian forces, the men and women from across the country, all provinces and territories that make up our forces, served with remarkable distinction, and there was deep sacrifice in the 12 years of Afghanistan. 40,000 men and women served in that country on a mission that their country, parliamentarians, sent them on, and they served with valor and distinction. So it's important to mark the sacrifice of the 158 soldiers that gave their life on the mission, and as well as the others that served or were injured or came back. And so it's a way to mark that achievement and those sacrifices, in a way for Canadians here in Ottawa, at the military bases across the country, and at the 3 cenotaphs in my riding. We'll be having ceremonies and marking the same 2 minutes of silence we'll be doing here in Ottawa. So I think Canadians will do it to say thank you and to recognize the sacrifice that took place.
Jack Harris, in your view, how has the government handled the preparations for this event?
Well, Peter, you know, this is a day that we all accept is there for a particular reason, to recognize and honour the commitment made by Canadian Forces members and their families who went to Afghanistan, served with distinction, as Erin had pointed out, in some cases, very sadly, lost their lives or had injuries that physical and mental that's going to make a difference to their lives forever. I'm not prepared to be partisan today. I hope tomorrow is not a partisan event from the government's point of view or otherwise. I know there are some veterans who are conflicted about it because of concerns about being properly treated. What is important is that we recognize what has been the sacrifices that have been made and the commitment that was made, honor them in a proper way, and then but be concerned that Afghanistan was a 12-year mission, but Afghanistan still needs help from the Canadian people, and also the veterans. What happens on the next day and the next day and the next day, we've got to be committed to that.
Frank Valeriat, what's your view on how this special day has been organized?
Well, I like Jack and Erin, agree that we have to honor our veterans, and tomorrow is a wonderful celebration of that honor that we will be showing them. But unfortunately, and it's not being partisan to point out the failure of the government. They told Legions about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, the Legion in Guelph has no event planned. Most Legions across Canada have no events planned because they were given such short notice, and frankly, they're furious. Those in the House only found out today as a result of a question that a Conservative asked another Conservative about what the events will be tomorrow, and really we're only finding out about it in a haphazard way. People who weren't invited are only now recently being invited to this event. Right. If we want to show our true honor for our veterans, we're going to honor the new Veterans Charter. We're going to honor our social covenant that we've committed to, a social covenant that the minister says exists when he's in the House, and yet the government's lawyers say do not exist when they're involved in a lawsuit in British Columbia where veterans are suing the government for not being properly funded.
Let's come back to some of this, but Mr. O'Toole, you know, I mean, it is a day to honor those who served there, but the truth is some of them have decided they're not coming. The Legions are angry with the way this has been rolled out. Why have there been these? Well, let me get you to answer the criticism. What about the criticism you're hearing about the way this day's been put together, and the fact that some veterans have said they're not coming?
Well, listen, Peter, there'll be criticism on anything. Some people criticize too much money is being spent. Some will say not enough is being done. You know, Frank said, well, he's not going to be partisan, and then proceeded to be partisan. Look, you can never do these things perfectly, but here's what happened. A month and a half ago, our last troops came back. The security and training mission ended, and we're also going to be celebrating in early June the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings. So it was appropriate to do it before D-Day and Canada Day, to mark the mission. I think it's being done in a very classy way.
But it was announced only, what, 6 weeks ago, and everybody knew the mission was ending March 15th.
The details
well before March 15th. That's right.
The details of the National Day started getting announced a few weeks ago, yes. But I think if you see what will transpire tomorrow, you'll see that it will have some similarities to military parades and honors that you might see on Remembrance Day. It will also have different ways for Canadians to express their passion. My favorite part of this commemoration is actually the Soldier On relay, 19 injured soldiers taking the last flag that flew in Kandahar from Trenton Military Base here to Ottawa, inspired. You have veterans with overcoming their injuries and being part of this. So I think, like anything in this city, as you know, Peter, there will be criticism, but I think there will also hopefully be some nonpartisan gestures to sort of say, look, we can argue a lot in this place, but we have our freedom in this chamber behind us because of our veterans from World War I right through to Afghanistan.
Jack Harris, do you see it that way? And I guess the point in some ways, and we've been hearing some of this in our coverage, that you may have a fight with the Department of National Defense or Veterans Affairs over the way you're being treated as a soldier or as a veteran, but in some ways you're being asked to check that anger, that criticism for a day that's about remembering sacrifice and the efforts and successes of you and your colleagues on the battlefield in Afghanistan.
Well, I think you're right, Peter. I mean, we're talking about one day here. I could give just as long a list or longer list than Frank did about the mess of the organization, et cetera, et cetera. But tomorrow is one day. Before today and yesterday and after tomorrow, we'll be still talking about those very important issues about veterans. But I think we can check it for one day, hopefully have a day of acknowledgement and remembrance. I think that I talked to veterans today. They're coming tomorrow, even some of them who have concerns, because they're not going. They want to honor their comrades and their friends and their families as well. And they will be continuing to protest and act and raise the concerns the next day and the next day. And we will be there with them, fighting day after day to ensure that what they get what they need, they get what they deserve, and they get treated fairly and with respect. Okay, that hasn't always been happening.
So, Mr. Villard, your colleagues are saying here this is not the time to talk about the concerns you might have about the treatment of veterans.
Well, let me express it this way. I met with a veteran who's going to be walking in tomorrow's parade, and he said, you may have us on parade, but we're not happy. And that's the unfortunate thing. You mentioned symbolism at the beginning. There's no question that we have to honor our veterans, and we have to engage in these activities like we are tomorrow with the National Day of Honor. But it has to be complemented with action, not just symbolism, not just talk, but with action. I hope Jack's right. I hope Aaron's right. I hope that action comes to fruition later. But so far, I don't see it.
Little things, Mr. O'Toole. One of the concerns is that you mentioned the relay. The relay will be delivering the last flag flown, Canadian flag flown in Afghanistan, and it's going to be delivered and end up in the hands at the end of the ceremony, and it'll be given as part of the ceremony to the Prime Minister. There's a lot of veterans in social media and military experts saying, the Governor General's the Commander-in-Chief, and he should be receiving the flag, not the Prime Minister. What do you make of those kinds of criticisms?
Actually, the Queen is. I have the Queen's commission from when I was commissioned as an officer. So the Governor General, and
he's her representative here in Canada.
I think we also have to realize that this will culminate on the steps of our Parliament. And Peter, as I said in the past, the hard decisions made in this place, sometimes not a unified voice, but often in times of war, there's a lot of agreement in this place amongst the parties. But it is Parliament that sends our men and women into harm's way. And we see a few F-18s landing in Romania and providing support in NATO this week. So it is Parliament that sends our soldiers. So I think it's appropriate. The flag, it's important to say, Peter, is actually first going to be given to the Chief of Defence Staff.
True.
So our top general, and handed over to the Prime Minister. There's a lot of symbolism. I hope that flag from Kandahar is given a very special place in our National War Museum just down the way. But I think it's appropriate to be on Parliament and for the Prime Minister and Minister of Defence and all MPs to be a critical part of this.
Any thoughts on that, gentlemen, to finish, Mr. Harris?
Well, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that significant that the Prime Minister is ultimately receiving it on behalf of the people of Canada. You know, it is kind of ironic because it was this Prime Minister who, a year or so ago, without consulting anybody, returned the royal name to the Air Force and the Navy.
We're happy about it.
Well, the only people looking for were people who were no longer in the Navy, as far as I understand.
That's not true. I like serving in the same RCAF that my grandfather did.
Some people might like that, but that it is kind of ironic that that's not happening tomorrow. I think the Prime Minister is the appropriate person to ultimately get this, and I don't want it to be regarded as a partisan thing.
Although Liberals in the House this week, Mr. Valera, on a number of occasions have accused the Prime Minister of making the ceremony all about him.
Absolutely, and that's what he has done. He's made it about him. He's placed himself in a position of receiving the flag when the Commander-in-Chief, the Queen's representative in Canada, the Governor-General, should be receiving that flag on behalf of all Canadians. That's proper protocol. I've heard from dozens of veterans who've expressed their feeling that it is inappropriate that a partisan politician like Mr. Harper should be receiving that flag, especially when he's using this opportunity to bring the attention to himself instead of where it rightfully belongs, and that's on all of our veterans across Canada.
It's good that Frank's not going to be partisan about this day.
All right, gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you all for taking time to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.